parents favored my sister so much, they spent my medical treatment funds on her instead. I refused my mother's selfish demands and cut ties. My aunt said, "No worries. You'll see." 10 years later, I opened my door. And the police were there. Now, everything changed. "Look, from now on, this is your new home. Unfortunately, we don't need a sick person," I was suddenly told. I was unwittingly taken by car, only to find myself at my aunt's house. Before I realized it, my father had declared that he wouldn't pay for my medical expenses in order to cover the costs of my sister's study abroad. Lost for words, I was in a daze. But my aunt warmly welcomed me. "Sonia, won't you become my child?" she offered. From that day, I began a new life as the child of my aunt and uncle, and 10 years have passed. My name is Sonia. I have 2 sets of parents. I regard one set as the worst and deeply respect and cherish the other. You might wonder why I have 2 sets of parents. It's because my illness complicated the bonds within my family. Since childhood, I've had frequent unexplained seizures, constantly requiring attention. While the symptoms are somewhat controlled by medication, stress and fatigue make seizures more likely, which is why my parents strictly told me to avoid exercise. I was always a mere spectator during gym class and couldn't play with my friends freely. On the other hand, my younger sister Noel, who was 4 years younger than me, was energetic and talented, carrying all of our parents' expectations. As she grew up, she was particularly passionate about basketball. In elementary school, she joined a local mini basketball club that was well regarded, and her talent flourished. She later joined a famous sports club, her skills improved remarkably, and in games, she always played as a starting member. As a representative, she led the team and actively competed with older players during practice. I felt proud watching her, yet a little envious. During this time, my parents began to make a clear distinction between how they treated me and Noel. This was especially true in terms of meals. Noel received nutritious homemade food, while for me, it was mostly simple bread and instant soup. Sometimes, I would get leftovers from what Noel didn't finish. There was also a disparity in clothing. Noel wore trendy children's clothes, while I was given hand-me-downs. For birthdays, Christmas, and school promotions, Noel was treated specially, whereas I was often neglected. This discriminatory treatment became a part of my daily life. "Big sister, won't you play basketball with me?" my innocent younger sister would always ask cheerfully. She held the ball and looked at me with shining eyes. "Sorry, I can't do intense exercise," I reluctantly answered. Noel looked up at the sky, pondering, then suddenly smiled. "We can at least pass the ball, right?" she said as she tried to hand me the basketball. I thought I could handle just practicing passes, but my parents disagreed. My mother was especially strict. As I reached to take the ball, she forcefully shook off my hand and yelled loudly, "Sonia, you never know when you might have a seizure, so don't do anything." Startled by her shouting, my sister froze in place. The ball dropped to the ground and slowly rolled away. Picking up the ball, my mother returned it to my sister with a smile. "Noel, let's practice passing together," she said. After glancing at me, she spoke kindly to my sister and walked away with her. After they left, I felt a deep sadness and irritation, and I cried alone. A memorable event occurred when I was in the first year of middle school, and Noel was in the 3rd grade of elementary school. On a spring day, I felt unwell from the morning and was bedridden. Due to my sister's important game, my parents left me at home and went to the match. When I'm feeling ill, it'll be more likely for me to have seizures, I thought. The overlap of feeling unwell and being left alone heightened my anxiety, accumulating stress, and by noon, I had a severe seizure. Feeling the danger, I immediately called an ambulance. When I woke up, I was on a hospital bed. Just as I woke up, a nurse who came to change my form noticed and smiled at me. "Sonia, you're in the hospital. Do you understand me?" she asked, and I nodded in response. Looking carefully around, there was no sign of my family in the hospital room. "Excuse me, has my family visited?" I asked. "The family is scheduled to come tomorrow morning. You'll be on your own tonight," the nurse replied. This confirmed that my parents and sister had not yet returned from the basketball trip. Even when I'm taken away by an ambulance, nobody's worried about me. It's like I'm not family, just a nuisance, I thought to myself as tears welled up and blurred my vision. I covered my head with a blanket and cried silently. After being taken away by an ambulance, my parents, facing criticism from the neighbors, started leaving me at my aunt's house, who is my father's sister. My aunt and uncle work at a game development company, and as they had no children of their own, they were always happy to have me over every week. "It's fun having Sonia around, it's like having our own child," my aunt would always say. They loved games and would teach me about their favorite ones, which made me look forward to visiting. One notable game was one they developed together, set in a fictional world. It was incredibly engaging, and I would play it for hours. They always served me the same meals they ate themselves. My aunt's cooking was exceptional, and I often asked for seconds. "I've always wanted to pick out children's clothes," my aunt said as she joyfully chose clothes for me. Visits to my aunt's house became my emotional support, making me feel cherished and providing a place of solace. As the first term of my first year in junior high came to an end and summer vacation was approaching, my father took me to my aunt's house. The car was packed with luggage, and I was excited about the prospect of spending the summer vacation there. After arriving and unloading my things, my father unusually came inside, appearing to be in a good mood, but my aunt looked concerned. Feeling the unusual atmosphere, I began to feel anxious. However, since my relationship with my father was not very good, I couldn't ask him directly about my concerns. While I was trying to gauge the situation, my father spread his arms wide and cheerfully said, "Look, from now on, this is your new home. Unfortunately, we don't need a sick person." I was shocked, and my father's voice was jovial. Even though my aunt and other relatives were angry, it seemed my parents were not listening. Their minds were completely occupied with my sister's basketball scholarship abroad. "To cover the costs of your sister's study abroad, we won't pay for your medical expenses," they said. No matter how much my aunt and uncle tried to persuade them, their efforts did not reach my parents. "If you stop the treatment for her illness, I will take Sonia in," my aunt declared resolutely. My parents readily accepted the proposal. That's how I learned that my parents had let go. Now you can watch the second part by pressing share and more.